Hello, everybody. Thank you for that one person who clapped. So my name is Tom, and I'm one of the organisers. So we had Adam earlier on from the Startup Network. My name's Tom, and I work for Google. Myself and Laura, the girl right over there, just waving. So we are the Google side that helped organise today's event. And I'd say, there we go. Now, I remember a couple of months ago, I went to my boss and I told him that I wanted to do the biggest kind of startup event that we could possibly do within Google. I don't think we could do it. We could have done a bigger one. We had the room filled up and we had plenty of people online. So all in all, I think this has been a great success. So I want to, before we finish, I want to give a round of applause to Laura and Adam, wherever Adam is, I can't see. Okay, so I'm here to just kind of MC the last part of it, and then there is alcohol afterwards. It wouldn't be an Irish event without alcohol. So the people who have gone, well, that just means there's more for us. So we have Paddy Flynn up now. So Paddy he's the VP of Geodata. So he's quite a big wig in Google. So we're quite happy to have him with us, and he's been working with the Irish ecosystem for years. I was in a meeting with him recently, and he kind of went through the history of what he'd done in the Irish ecosystem that I wasn't aware of, and it's very impressive. Now, usually I say a joke about somebody who comes up on stage. However, he has VP in his title, and I'm not an idiot. So I'm going to just allow Paddy to come up now and give a little warm welcome to everybody.
Tom. No need to be afraid of saying anything. So thank you for giving me the chance to come and talk to you today. It's great to have an event like this back in the Foundry. We did a number over the years, and COVID made some of those things a little harder, so it's fantastic to see a startup ecosystem event here again. So as Tom said, my day job is looking after geo operations. That's Google Maps, operations for Google Maps, and my non-day job has been working with the startup community for many years. Something that I've been interested in, and wherever I can get the time to come and do things like this, even though I'm not involved in the organization today, sadly, but to help Google contribute to the startup community. And I guess speaking of a community, I did look at everybody who's represented here today, and we've been working obviously with startups for a number of years, and there's a growing community, I guess, of supports around that, from EI and the LEOs that have been there for a long time, from the VCs, should I say, HBAN, who were just on before, NDRC, Research and Academia, and supports like Tech Ireland, Scale Ireland, and Dogpatch, who've played really important community roles over the last number of years. And then industry like ourselves. You know, we tend to be very parochial in Ireland. The GAA is alive and well, so we all hate each other until but we all really need to work together as well. So we all need to be part of a community. So I think that's the Irish way. I think it's really important that we have a connected community. And I think we do now more than ever, but it is still fragile. I was at an event with Scale Ireland in the west of Ireland in Limerick not so long ago, a couple of months ago, and there was a startup on the panel called Hook Bio from the West Life Sciences, and they're flying, they're doing really well, but they were able to talk about a year previous, they only had weeks left before they would have had to shut up shop. So we need a connected and thriving ecosystem to support the Hook Bios and many others like them. And being a founder in a startup is a vocational thing. It is not something you'd necessarily choose to do. I think any founder would say that, but they're driven to do it. So the purpose of events like this and having the community represented is to help startups like Hook Bio make progress and make connections. Our aim is to help wherever we can and wherever we can be relevant. That's morphed and changed over the years, but we have some durable things. We have, like, through our cloud team, our Cloud for Startups, our Google for Startups accelerators and programs, which we continue with. working with our partners at Dogpatch on First Fridays, which I know if Patrick was here, he's going to get back up and running very soon, prompt. And then things like our Adopt a Startup program that we've run here many times over the years. So we're keen to continue to contribute to the community. I guess this is a point of change as well, and a point of change in the tech world, but in society in general. We've come out of COVID, hopefully. There's lots of challenges geopolitically. We've climate challenges, and then we've got a generational change in technology. Alongside all the usual things that startups face, from funding to talent availability to how do I grow. So it is a pivotal time, a generational change. I'm old enough to have been around during the mainframe stroke mini computer age, to the PC age and Windows age, to the internet age, to the Gen AI or the AI, machine learning or Gen AI change that we have today. Scale Ireland did a survey in February, and their observations from the startups that they surveyed was that 82% of them are planning to use or already using or to deploy AI in their business over the next year. So it is very top of mind, and the cycles of change are extremely fast. ChatGPT bringing out new versions, Google, Gemini coming out with many new versions. We've got many different tools, multimodal, long context, how many tokens can you get, the price of compute power, new chips coming out, making things more efficient all the time. And the cycles are weeks and months, they're not years as they used to be. So the challenge for us here, at least in the Irish ecosystem, I know there's many from outside Ireland here too, but is how do we do that smartly from an Ireland Inc. perspective? One of the things that I think remains durable in that, at least for me from an Ireland Inc. perspective, is how do we marry our core competencies with these new ways of working and tools? Be that in life sciences, pharma, agri-food, which traditionally we've been good at, fintech, or even cybersecurity, which is a growing competency that we have. So I think that remains open. Maybe just to finish, and that you get on with listening to the real people, Google has and will continue to support the startup ecosystem here locally and globally. We do want to bring those programs and tools, along with many others like us in the industry, to help startups, particularly here, navigate the challenging and ambiguous journeys that they're on at the moment. So please do look out if you're local, and if you're in EMEA as well, look out for our accelerators. We have one open at the moment on AI and education. So look out for our programs. And take the time at these kind of events to connect with each other, learn from each other. They're generally the greatest value, and the serendipitous connections. So make the most out of them. Maybe don't drink too much, but drink a little, and make those connections. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Paddy. Okay, so next up we've got panel discussions. So you can probably tell by all the mics that are on the chairs. So we have Will, who's going to be hosting the panel. Now, Will's my boss. Now, remember earlier on I said about jokes. So Lorna and Amy and the other people, I have watched Will research today. Every time I came in, not just used to the other the other panelists as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he's found your Bebo accounts, and there's a lot of people in here that don't know that reference. It's a very old Irish reference. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Will, and he's going to introduce everybody else, and that's me. I just came up to insult him. That's it.
Thanks, mate. I'm double mic'd up today. Thank you, everyone. Oof, that light's intense. I'd like to introduce Lorna, CEO of CPL, and Amy Neale, General Partner at Delta Partners VC. Please come on stage. And yeah, and a round of applause, please. I'm going to sit here. Yeah, very bright. So I'm double mic'd up here, so I don't know which one's works, but I'm going to go with this one. I'm very excited to be here today, and I appreciate so much everyone who's building something and taking busy time out of their day to come and learn with AI, and from every single one of us. But yes, so let me kick off. Maybe just a little brief intro about yourselves, your background. We'd love to learn a bit more about you and obviously myself. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So my name is Lorna Conn. I'm actually a chartered accountant by profession, but joined CPL back in 2017 as CFO when we were a listed company and moved into the CEO role about 2.5 years ago. CPL is a talent solutions organisation. We have about 13,000 staff. We operate in every sector within our industry, from specialist recruitment to BPO, RPO, MSP, business outsourcing, strategic talent advisory services. So we're really across the entire talent spectrum. We feel like we have a really good sense and temperature check of particularly the domestic economy and the talent landscape. And we serve probably 4,500 clients, so really good insights as well from a customer perspective. So that's me, delighted to be here.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here. Can't see anybody in the audience with these bright lights, but yeah, great to be able to contribute to the conversation. I am an investor with Delta Partners. Delta is an Irish venture capital firm. We have been investing in the Irish market for about 30 years, one of the first VC firms to set up here. We launched our latest fund about 2 years ago, so we've been very active in the Irish tech ecosystem for the last 2 years, making a ton of investments. Our specific focus is on seed stage investments, so we go early, often the first institutional money that goes into a startup company. Often investing alongside angel investors, sometimes alongside other institutional VCs. And we take our role very seriously, that our job is to get startups to those first commercial milestones that will really unlock later tranches of capital. In terms of sectors and segments, we go right across the board. I think our approach is, if we're going to be investing in Irish tech companies, then we don't have the luxury of being a specialist investor. We need to be generalist. So we will look at everything. And if you look at the portfolio that we've compiled over the last couple of years, you'll probably see that that's the case. Maybe just in terms of my own background, I'm also have been involved in the Irish tech ecosystem for quite a long time. I'm on the board of NDRC, so happy to support the great work that's happening over there. Great to hear Paddy referencing that just now. Started out in the academic sphere, then moved into commercial, spent some time in large corporate as well, but now firmly dedicated to investing.
Lovely. Extremely diverse and a lot of spark for me to ask some interesting questions. The first question that I want to ask, and I think I just briefed you folks around this, is the concept of the talent market, right? And with all this change in AI, we're starting to see that there is a lot of worry and buzz around, like, what are the future roles going to look like? In terms of your experiences and your bit of advice, I mean, both of you I think could answer this one. The question is, how do you see the talent market shifting? What roles and are companies looking for? How should startups prepare for, searching for roles and shaping that talent market in terms of the skill set?
I think that's a really broad question, and I suppose I'd make maybe a couple of opening comments. First of all, I think the pace of AI is so vast at the minute that it is encouraging endless innovation, and I think that's only ever a good thing for society, and it's only ever a good thing for business economies. I think some countries where labour shortage supplies are a real factor within their economy. For example, Japan, AI can't come quick enough because that will give them an opportunity, I suppose, to bridge some of the gaps in terms of labour supply and replace some of the more repetitive routine tasks that are better done by kind of AI as opposed to a human. I think in our business, and our industry. And in many, many companies, I would say that it's very, very hard to replicate that human touch and that ability for humans to contextualize and to apply compassion and empathy and all those kind of softer skills to decision making. I see AI as just a huge empowering enabler to cut out reams and reams of redundant, low value add, repetitive activity that just frees up the mind and our space and our capacity to do bigger and better things. There is a common consensus that whilst AI will replace jobs, it will also create new jobs. So I never really look at it as a perspective of eating up opportunity for the human race. I think it's a huge enabler for the human race to accelerate and to even move forward, I suppose, in terms of all the achievements that we can achieve together as a race. So for me, AI is something that there's an awful lot of talk around, a huge potential for rabbit-holing conversations. I think people need to get serious and get real about what the value and the use case is for the use of AI within their organisations and get really targeted and focused and leverage the huge potential that AI can unleash on your organisation, but do it in a really structured way.
Plus one. We definitely see that within Google as well. Maybe from like the VC's perspective, right? As you, like, could you comment a bit on like sort of,
Yeah, I think there's a couple of angles on talent, right? One is the long-reaching implications for talent and what AI will do and the jobs that will inevitably disappear, but the new jobs that will come on stream. You know, there's that fantastic kind of comparison to the arrival of the spreadsheet where we lost 300,000 accountants from the US market, but introduced 600,000 other new jobs as a result of spreadsheets. For the here and now, from a VC's point of view, it's a really interesting time. The first kind of perspective for us is how much further can companies get on less capital because of the efficiencies that AI can bring into their teams. I mean, that's fantastic from a VC's point of view. If we can deploy smaller amounts of capital and see companies achieving greater value in faster cycles, that's really exciting. That's really interesting. And I mean, we're not seeing that yet because we don't quite know what those new jobs and efficiencies are going to look like. But, you know, coding co-pilots, all of that great stuff is really exciting. On the other hand, and perhaps more immediately near term, the thing that we're facing on a daily basis is that our companies are all thinking about how AI is impacting their businesses and therefore wanting to hire AI-oriented roles in their businesses. And that's a skills and talent shortage, which is really, really apparent right now. And actually quite the opposite to my prior point is that people are commanding high salaries, which is not what startups are typically used to doing. The brilliant thing for folk who are thinking about maybe taking a role in a startup and deploying some of those AI-adjacent skills is that you're working on something brand new and getting to really put those skills to work in innovative and exciting ways that you may not find in a larger scale company. Google by exception, of course.
Yeah. No, let me take you again, maybe now into the concept of like innovating like startups. So we're starting to see that more in the enterprise segment, large companies are starting to think, okay, how do I innovate from within? How do I relook at all my processes and implement AI, right? So there's a lot of talk around like fostering a culture of continuous innovation, right? I don't really know what that means, right? Like within the org. Could you guys like maybe comment on, you know, what does like continuous innovation, if you had to look into like the nuts and bolts of like companies, maybe when you're investing, what does it mean exactly to like continuously innovate or create structures or cultures of continuous innovation, being at the forefront, but yet being efficient enough to execute on the core problem that they're trying to solve?
Well, I take it, yeah. So from a startup point of view, which I think is perhaps where you're pushing towards the difference between a startup approach to innovation and a larger company approach to innovation. From a startup point of view, The founders of an early stage startup are literally standing on a burning platform. They have a limited amount of capital, and day by day, month by month, that capital is ticking away, and they're trying to make progress, which forces them into, and apologies, I'm mixing my metaphors, they're on burning platforms, but turning on sixpences. They have to be able to be extraordinarily agile, responsive to what they're learning on an almost daily, weekly basis, and dealing with large amounts of ambiguity. The great thing about a startup company, particularly an early stage startup, is everything is being built for the first time, typically by small teams, without entrenched cultures. And so it's actually so much easier to be able to move quickly in response to what you're seeing in the market. From a larger organization, of course, that's so much harder. It's not so much turning on a sixpence as turning an oil tanker, right? Yeah. To think about introducing new opportunities. They have legacy tech stacks, legacy systems that maybe decades in the making. They have embedded teams and cultures who are used to doing things. Things have always been done that way here, which makes it extraordinarily hard. And therefore, I think that's why we see large organizations really trying to learn from startups to bring into play things like experimentation. What does it look like to run an experiment, learn from that experiment, and throw things away quickly and start again? What does it look like to bring a learning mindset into your team so that you've got individuals who are encouraged to bring challenging questions to the table as opposed to, going with the status quo? And I suppose one of the things, I spent time in a large corporate where we were literally bringing startups into the organization, both for collaborative purposes, but also to do some of that learning. And one of the really interesting things is actually, how do you do that with startups? So how do you work together? How do you think about your procurement processes in a large organization so that you're actually fit to work with young, agile companies who may not have that ISO 27001 certification yet? Sometimes you have to take some of those risks, I think.
Interesting. Maybe, Lorna, comment on that?
I suppose I can comment more specifically from a larger organisation. Yes. And I agree entirely with Amy there. Sometimes in a larger organisation, staleness and complacency can creep in because you're large, established over many years, and the ways in which you do things become embedded within the organisation, and that can be stifling at times for innovation. I think one of the big enablers for us as a large organisation in operation for over 34 years is our relationships with our software vendors and our partners. So we've been able to lean into those relationships to encourage our innovation, I suppose, particularly around technology and creating tech-enabled supports for us across the organisation, because those tech companies are running at such an innovative pace that we have that kind of cross-pollination with them. We're getting the benefit of what they're doing and being able to apply it across a larger organisation. But I think what's really critical to drive innovation is, it's the old adage, I suppose, it is putting structures in place to measure and monitor that progress. And when you have the structure in place, it fosters a mindset where innovation is expected, because you're looking for it and you're measuring it, you're acknowledging it, you're rewarding it, you're incentivizing it. And certainly for a market leader like us, we just can't sit still. We can't stay still because we'll be overtaken in the market. So there's that constant need to be a market leader. And to be a market leader, naturally, you need to be innovative. But as always, it takes the vision at the top and it takes the people around you to be able to deliver on that.
Thank you. Maybe resonating a bit with what Paddy was saying and just looking into the audience. I think here in this audience we have a lot of brave founders who are taking a leap to build something. If you had to provide maybe some advice, both from a talent perspective, and from the VC side, what advice do you have for AI founders looking to expand beyond their home market, and as they look into expanding, internationally and building their product? I'd like to maybe hear your points of advice as you manage maybe global investments and global organization.
Well, first of all, don't do it alone is probably the biggest piece of advice that I can give. There's governmental supports out there through Enterprise Ireland, Scale Ireland, so lean into as much support that is out there as possible to help to help you build that global ambition and aspiration. Join communities of like-minded entrepreneurs. We've already mentioned the NDRC Accelerator and Dogpatch Labs. So, being immersed in that environment of like-minded people who are all trying to achieve the same mecca, which is global dominance. You can learn from each other, the pitfalls of progress when going internationally and where people have been successful. And obviously it's the natural thing of sharing networks and insights along the journey. So I think being an entrepreneur, I can only imagine, and I've nothing but the utmost of respect for entrepreneurs, because it's not something I feel that I could ever do myself. But I'm sure it's a very lonely place to be at times. You've got this huge aspiration to be this successful company, but you're at the top and you're driving almost everything. You are the leader of almost every function in your organisation. So I think immersing yourself in that environment where you can get that kind of community of support, I think is hugely important.
Oh yes, hear you. And maybe Amy, some tactical advice I think could be interesting to hear your perspective as you are on the investing front. Companies trying to expand internationally face various problems, right? Like from language constraints to, again, talent, skill sets. I'd love to hear maybe for the audience some points on that.
Well, I think, first and foremost, if you're building a company from Ireland, you're building a company to be international from day one. If it's a VC backable company, one of the wonderful things about the startup ecosystem here, there are a few startup ecosystems in the world that are really well developed, that are small indigenous markets. The Nordics, Singapore, and Ireland, you have to be building global from day one, which gives founders a completely different vantage point to how they think about internationalization. And from a VC point of view, that's really, really important for us, right? So when we're looking at startup companies and evaluating them from an investment point of view, we need to be able to see that global opportunity, because we need to be able to see how they're going to have successful exits that give us the returns that we're ultimately seeking 5, 7, 10 years down the line, whatever that might be. So Ireland is an awesome place because your peers are all thinking about international markets from day one. That could be close international markets, or it could be far international markets. And Lorna spoke to some of the supports here. The Enterprise Ireland support that Ireland has is the best in the world. We have offices all over the world that are ready and waiting to receive our entrepreneurs to help them make those connections. So fantastic place is the first point I would make to be starting an international business. But then I think, international is a very big word. The world is a very big place. So when you're thinking about that global world domination, it is actually really important to be specific. It's very easy to think, I'm going to conquer the US. That's something that we would hear very, very often. But that's a very large pie to chew off. So I think it is really, really important to make sure that your international go-to-market strategy is specific and well thought out from day one. So making sure that you know what geography in particular, state, if it's the US or maybe other market that you're entering into, is where that is, that it's the right one, and that you have some level of access to that market. At the early stages, sales is often led by the founders of a company, and oftentimes founders are relying on their own points of access to get into markets, and that's something that's really helpful, really valuable, and really important to think about. I do think it also ties to the talent question, because increasingly companies that we see are not just recruiting within the Irish market. They will also have team members in other markets, which is fantastic. The other angle on internationalization, of course, is, so alongside being specific, I do think that you need to be thinking about building systems and infrastructure from the get-go that have the potential to scale. The last thing that you want to do is to build something and then have to replicate from the ground up for every brand new market that you're going into. So having an eye to that international playbook is something that's super important as well. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's really, really important. And I think that the startups in the room are a great place to be starting from for internationalization.
100%. Thank you for that. I think this is extremely valuable for startups that at some point may reach the phase of wanting to, raise capital and things to look out for. And as you say, startups in Ireland already have to think internationally, right? So this is really interesting. Maybe another question that I wanted to push forward here was how do you think the emergence of AI, I want to talk about trends mostly, right? And what are you folks seeing in terms of companies being created, what problems they're solving? Purely from your perspective and what you've seen, what new dynamics and topics are you seeing being created as a result of AI? And what trends and what problems with AI are you starting to see that startups are seeking to solve? Which ones are more interesting than others that you from your personal perspective, and why?
So I guess I think of AI as an enabler. We had the emergence of the internet. We had the emergence of mobile as a platform. We now have AI. These are kind of seismic shifts in the technology landscape. But when I think about new companies that were built on the back of those massive seismic shifts, they were either focused on contributing to that infrastructure or they were focused on building on top of that infrastructure. In terms of building on top of new infrastructures and new platforms, I mean, the same holds for AI as it does for any other time in human history. What is the problem that a company is trying to solve that exists in the world? What is the use case that they're looking to solve for? What is the market that that the company has experience in where it knows that there's a problem large enough to go after? AI brings fantastic efficiencies and new ways of solving problems that we've been trying to solve for the entirety of human history. But actually, for me, really, it is an enabler. We don't know yet what that looks like over the long term. But for right now, what are we seeing? We are seeing companies that are sitting around the AI space with new tooling methods, with new supports for people that are building with that enabler. And then we're seeing lots of new applications being built on top that are addressing sort of use cases that we've always known exist. And that's sort of how I think about the market shaking out. It's extraordinarily exciting. The next couple of years will definitely see the birth of new, really impactful, globally dominant companies that we don't know exist yet. Yeah. But it's really, we are literally at day zero.
Yeah, totally. I just think the speed at which this is going, there's no newsletter or there's nothing I can do to catch up on it. And that kind of also baffles me a bit. But yeah.
Somebody said to me earlier today, from a VC point of view, it's a little bit like being Christopher Columbus. We're sort of scanning the horizon, desperately trying to find the direction of which to go. But yeah, it's all up for grabs.
And you'll land somewhere, right? Yeah, so you don't know where, but land
But the thing about it is that every company, whether you're a startup or an established company, is grappling with how they can deploy AI effectively. There is no roadmap that's there or a blueprint that's tried and tested that we can all use. And we ourselves in CPL are trying to fasten down what our use cases are, because we've probably spent 6 months talking about AI, but we haven't arrived at the point whereby we're deploying it in a really effective way and generating value. And that's what you need to do. Value through replaced activities or reduced headcount, whatever that value might look for you. But every single company has to go on that journey themselves, because I think AI is something of use for everybody and for every company and for every organisation. But as we said, just the pace of it, we're all just running after it, trying to find our way as we go.
Yeah, completely running from behind. And I think just thinking of an analogy of trying to pause and think a bit, I read something that was quite interesting, that it wasn't how the new jobs that will emerge, because it's exactly what you were saying, right? It's impossible to imagine what jobs will be created or how it will look like. But the best way to look at it was, in a matrix, it was more like tasks and time to task, right? And however close you are to that, if you want to the zero, the more potential it is to be replaced by AI, right? And sort of shifting the mindset of business leaders to view problems and business processes from a task to time to task perspective was really something that I picked up that was quite interesting. But yeah, like maybe like last question from a statement that we've heard, and I want to see your comments on this. Forefront of innovation will be largely dominated by a few tech giants, while startups will concentrate purely on pioneering the models of applications. Do you agree with that statement? Yes or not? And why not? Or why yes?
Yes. Well, I agree with that statement. I'll hold fire for Amy. I suppose they've got the greatest capital power and the ability to put funds and money behind the investment. I think that leaves space for smaller companies to pursue novel applications. They can be faster followers, focus on much more niche applications. And that probably is the balance of the world when capital is abundant in one side of the world within the larger organisations, and scarcity is really the world of the startup. And perhaps that just focuses a different type of innovation.
I guess I think I agree with that statement, because I am sort of, well, to your point, that large companies have massive resources, and so much of the core needs to be built with massive resources, right? So it is actually a money play. And I compare it to the paradigm of cloud, right? So it's sort of a similar thing. But I'd like to reserve fundamental judgment because I don't know the answer.
For 2 years.
Yeah, for 2 years. Yeah.
That's okay. I just wanted to put that burning question. Maybe I think I have a little thing to throw to the audience. I don't have it, but someone there has it. If there's any questions, a bit like a fireside chat. There's one question.
Hi, my name's Michael from Is AI. Lorna, you spoke a bit about your own company's journey in exploring AI. You're essentially a recruitment consultant, a recruitment consulting business. What is the potential for disruption of AI in your market? And are you optimistic, pessimistic? How are you going to crack it?
I'm really optimistic, to be honest with you. I think there's lots of ways in which AI can improve our business model. And really, we operate in a world where speed of sourcing the right candidate and matching it to the right organisation, there's a number of different steps within that process. And the more that we can automate it, particularly when we have a database in Ireland of 3,500 candidates. So you can imagine a recruiter sifting through that candidate database and trying to find a really good match with good context to the needs of an organisation. So there's lots of different steps that we can use AI really effective within, I suppose, your standard recruitment process. 70% of our business, though, is in the more solutions-oriented space, I suppose, where we're in partnership with companies. Some companies, for example, we might have 1,300 staff on site, or we might have 500 staff on site. So we will be looking at AI to mature our ability to deliver insights, to monitor service level agreements and KPIs, etc. And we'll be looking to do that to give our clients and our customers better information, more timely information, and doing the kind of the more mundane routine tasks much quicker to free us up, back to the point on human capacity, to free up human capacity to focus on areas that are much more value add. In terms of disruption, and it's funny because we've gone through kind of the disruption that possibly job boards came. Everybody thought LinkedIn would kill the standard recruitment model. But both of those have been what I would call really good examples of tech enablement. That's how we see AI. We're going to use it to the very best of our powers to make our service offering to our clients slicker, quicker, and create ultimately more value. So I would be very optimistic. It's certainly something that we're embracing and at speed within CPL. Thank you.
Optimistic for sure. Any other questions?
Thanks. Hi everyone. In terms of that, we're seeing this pattern with I run a marketing AI enabled startup. we're seeing this pattern with like marketing agencies where brands are starting to take their marketing in-house because the tooling has gotten so good, and the feedback loop for marketing purposes is the feedback loop is tighter, and then the tools are so good that they can do a lot of what an agency can do, and it's more cost effective for them. I guess it's a question for both of you, Amy from the startups you've invested in side, and Lorna as well from the recruitment side. Like, are you worried about that outcome, or for the startups that Delta have invested in? Like, do you have thoughts around that paradigm? Or
Yeah, I think so. So marketing is obviously a very near-term use case that we're seeing being disrupted by AI, partly because it's effective, but also so easy to use, which is really interesting and exciting. So I definitely think that there will be a lot of disruption in the marketing value chain and who does what and how that works. There's a slight caveat that we can, we're all super sensitive to AI produced content, right? Everybody knows when they've seen something that's been generated by AI, and I'm sure that will get better over time, but we're pretty smart people at the end of the day, and we want something authentic and human in terms of how we're advertised to and marketed to. But I definitely think it's an interesting space, and it's definitely one of the earliest kind of use cases. So, yeah.
And just to very quickly add, I'm conscious of the time, totally agree with it, Amy. That's the first space within CPL where we utilised AI and utilised it effectively, to the point now that our entire marketing needs, and they would not be inconsiderable given the amount of candidates that we need to market for various different campaigns, for clients, etc. Almost our entire marketing capability is now in-house. We haven't gone external to kind of support that capability. So, yeah, I'd agree with you entirely, Amy.
I guess the question was more, so are you seeing that trend with like obviously recruitment is very specialised, yourself going in, but even like non-marketing
Yeah, good point.
They're so enabled by software now, and the agency model is starting to suffer in like non-marketing verticals.
Yeah, well, I think that the role of the agency across a whole bunch of different functions is up for debate and question. That has been a massive trend for startup companies, even pre-generative AI, right? Cutting out the middleman is one of the great things that startup companies have been able to do over the past, 20 plus years. So, yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Amy and Lorna, for taking time out of your day to come here. Really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience does as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
I'm still staying here, but do we have all the members of the panel, of the next panel? All right. I'd like to welcome Alice, Mansergh, Dmitry, Akhil, and John to the stage. Thank you. Missing. John's coming there. Thank you. Oh, familiar face back. Thank you very much for taking time again. Very, very busy people. And again, your experience is very much welcome. Maybe let's kick off with, again, a very small intro of each one of you. Alice, maybe start off.
Well, lovely to be here. I'm Alice Mansergh. I'm CEO at Tourism Ireland, which is a semi-state organisation, not really a startup, but excited to be here with all of you entrepreneurial folks. And what we do is we market the island of Ireland, so both Ireland and Northern Ireland, overseas to generate overseas tourism coming in. Now, I am so delighted to be back here because I actually spent 19 years at Google and only left in the past year or so. And during that time, I was at Google as it moved from scale up to the organisation it is now. I joined in 2004 and both marketed Google's own consumer products and then also helped lots of startups market their products. So I guess I have two hats on today, both from that experience and from my role in tourism now. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Dmitry?
It's my first time in Ireland and I like Ireland a lot because of local accent. I feel myself so comfortable here because it's first time when I'm not ashamed because of my own accent. Several words about my experience. My main role, I'm CEO and founder of Flow Health. It's the most popular and biggest health and fitness app in the world with 65 million monthly active users and 200 million in revenue. I believe that in Ireland, approximately 25% of all women are monthly active users. It's one of the most, country where Flow, probably one of the most popular apps. And also I have very intense experience with machine learning and apps. Together with my brother, we started or financed maybe 15 companies. We had 6 exits up to this moment. We sold one company to Facebook, one company to Google, one company to Farfetch before it bankrupted. We got money, don't worry. And one of our apps became the most popular and monetizable app in App Store last year because of implementation of generative AI. It's Lens app. It means that I have very good commercial experience in implementation of machine learning.
No doubt of success. Akhil?
Hey everyone, glad to be here. Thanks, William. So my name is Akhil Jain. I'm the CTO at Wayleadr. Been in Ireland from last 13 years, born and brought up in India. Prior to working for Wayleadr from last 3 years, I was chief architect for a company called Boxever. Many of you might know who are local here in Dublin, one of the Irish tech success stories that got sold to, got acquired by Sitecore in 2021. So I was the chief architect for Sitecore during the acquisition time. But then after that, I decided to move on to Wayleadr and work as their CTO. What we do at Wayleadr is we are basically all-in-one arrival solution. Now, this might sound like a new category. We proudly call ourselves as the category creator in this space. It's kind of a good combination of the workplace management with transportation and mobility. So what we do is make arriving for the employees to office very seamless, be it through reserving a parking spot, wayfinding if it's a huge parking lot, and you're not sure where exactly to go. Our motto is simple. We try to save the lifetime of time for every employee, and just helping them not to waste any time looking for the space. Nobody likes to talk about it, but most of the time, everyone who are sitting in their car trying to go to the office or going to the mall, they worry, somewhere at the back of their head whether am I going to go get the parking or not, right? So that's one of the fundamental things we do. We also do a lot of workplace management with desk booking, meeting room booking. And in the mobility and transportation side, we also have the solutions around carpooling. We call it as a way pooling. We also operate shuttle, which we call it as Way Shuttle, which operates right now in one of the specific regions in San Francisco. And we pretty much operate in 30 countries around the world. Many of the countries I've never been to. The languages I don't speak, but it's good to be, serving the clients over there. So that's me. Thank you.
That's great. Solving one of humanity's biggest problems, time. John?
Super. Hi, everyone. John O'Byrne. I look after Square's business here in Europe and the UK. Look, personally, I'm an ex-banker seeking redemption by trying to help other businesses. Square, if you don't know, it was founded in 2009 by Jack Dorsey. It's one of the largest scaled mobile point-of-sale and integrated software solutions. So effectively, any of that software that really helps customers run their business simpler, and a bit like your example in terms of simple motto. We've got a couple of things at the core of it. It's about economic empowerment. Can we, help sellers never miss a sale, and can we make things much simpler for them in terms of how they operate their business? And we're starting to roll out quite a number of AI Gen tools across that platform because there's such a scale platform with a collection of data there. We're able to really test it in real time.
Thank you very much for the intros. Maybe I'll kick off with an initial question that I think the four of you have faced, maybe at some extent during your careers. As a startup or a company grows and goes through their different phases, one of the things that we start to see is that there seems to be a trade-off around like advancing fast and iterating and continuing to hit your objectives and solve the problems. But it seems the problem of maintaining agility whilst keeping processes. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what strategies or best practices would you offer to, from your experiences, how to navigate this, right? Pick at any point of your career, any problem you solve. Like, I'd love to hear, anyone who wants to take the question. I think it goes to the four of you, but first one on Mike.
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, to begin with, just so with my own experience, I think to maintain that agility and also be at the forefront of the innovation of any startup, I think it's important to empower your team, right? Give them the autonomy to make decisions. And not to what they call it as have the analysis paralysis, right? You have to keep moving fast. You have to be out there, and gather the feedback, what the market is seeing, what you're trying to deliver, right? So I think that's very important. And to keep the agility in the fast-moving market, it's very important for companies to actually have that cross-department collaboration. What we have seen, especially in the startup, and from my own experience in a very small-sized company or even with the SMBs, right? What happens is you're trying to move so fast that probably your one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, right? And you can say the same thing with the departments, the cross departments, right? So having the cross department collaboration, I think, is very important for any startup that is trying to scale up and maintain that agility and keep doing that innovation.
Can any of you recall building from what you're saying, Akhil, like any particular example that you can remember vividly that sort of exemplifies this, maybe?
I mean, I can jump in, and it's funny, I also think this one is all about people, because often you'll have somebody with a brilliant idea who is the founder, and they might start off with a handful of people working with them, and everybody's, all those startup stereotypes, whether you're in a garage or around a kitchen table or wherever you are drinking your coffee and mapping out what you're doing. And then suddenly you get to 50 or 100 people, and that's a really different thing. You might know everybody on the team quite so well. You're not all working in lockstep. And I can definitely think of examples when I was working with startups and advising them on marketing strategy. You'd have people who had 300 people in their company, but the founder still wanted to be involved in every single decision. And, that's not going to scale. So I think one of the biggest shifts is just realizing in any organization, you are the sum of the people around you. You're the sum of their skill and motivation. And so whilst you can be passionate about the technology or the opportunity or the product market fit or whatever else, it's all going to come down to how well can you get organized with your people. And the bigger you get, the less that's about one-to-one influence and relationships, and the more you actually need to think hard about, well, who's going to do what and what will be the mechanisms through which we work together and stay informed and collaborate. So I would say all about people and getting to that tipping point of the bigger your team, the more you need to actually put thought into how do we stay in touch with each other and what are our decision-making mechanisms, if you will.
I may propose slightly contrarian idea, but my observation is that very often founding CEOs at the late stage of business is successful exactly because of micromanagement. But they know one specific detail. You may micromanage, but you should micromanage the most significant things at this moment. You should understand what you must micromanage and then micromanage it. And it makes you really effective if you may recognize what to micromanage, and then you start micromanage not everything, but specific things. It's a very good and very successful approach. And my personal experience with running a bigger organization, because currently we have 500 employees and maybe 40 teams or so, and 200 engineers. I would say that I didn't know before that how difficult it would be to focus. Because when you have 200 engineers and when you have hundreds of millions in revenue and when you have ton of opportunities, it's just naturally really difficult to focus, and people have ideas, they love own ideas, and invest to those ideas, and then it's it's extremely difficult, even when you're making this effort very consciously, to focus on organization on several significant things. It's the most difficult part of a job at this stage. Mostly because of kind of natural behavior of people who like own projects, who don't want to distribute bets, like who are just opportunistic, and it's a quite a challenge, I would say. It's much bigger challenge than to work at small organization, because in small organization you're naturally focused, because you can't be the focus, because you just don't have resources for the focus.
Great. Thanks so much. I think so. The things I gather from that, it seems people learn how to delegate when possible, and ultimately, like, focus seems to be like a big topic on, and know where to focus and what tasks to focus, right? Like, as you were mentioning, like, I mean, the word micromanage, I think, is sometimes, you know, in that sense, when the tasks are so relevant to the problem you're trying to solve, maybe there it's worth putting a bit more attention, and then the other parts learning how to delegate.
I think as well, just to add to that, it's really, and we sort of heard it in the last panel, it's really critical to have good people around you who can advise you as well, because you go through different stages, right? Yeah. At the very beginning, you really want to nail that product market fit, you know, get that right, get that 0 to 1 piece. But as the business starts to scale, you need something else, and you need different skills. So, you know, it's a path well trodden as well by many others, and it's about trying to be open to the feedback and not get too locked in, because it's that old adage of, you know, what got you here might not get you there, and it's being able to do those jumps so you can keep that jaws and that growth coming.
This leads me nicely into the next question, product market fit. For startups, what do you think is the most important indicator for having achieved product market fit? You know, I think drawing from experience, I think could be also interesting here, as you've gone through your ventures. Anyone? I think.
I can take it again if you want. So I think product market fit, like, there are so many indicators, you know, for startups. So it's not just 1 or 2 or 3, right? You have to keep gauging the user engagement. I think that's going to be the topmost thing, right? Whether you have the product that is doing well in the market, right, and gaining the traction of the customer base or your target audience. That's going to be important. How you measure that and how you track that is going to be absolutely critical for any startup, to track. That's going to be the first metrics. The second thing is, like, as you have the product in the market, it depends on the product vertical as well. What kind of product do you have, right? Sometimes many startups and the founders come up with these brilliant ideas, you know, but they don't know whether there is actual need of that product, and that's why we do the PMF kind of metrics and try to gauge where it's a product market fit or not. So I think, you know, as you scale, you still track the user engagement, but whether the satisfaction of the current user base should not go down or is going down, right? So if there is no dip in the user satisfaction as you scale, as you onboard more and more user, that's a very strong indicator to me, and should be to any startup that their product is doing well, right? Without dip in the confidence. And then obviously the third one I would like to call out is the lower churn rate, right? So that's very important. You need to gauge how many monthly active users you have, right? And again, it depends. These metrics might vary, especially, you know, if you are a product startup that is in the B2C space, or you are in a B2B kind of space. What is your monthly active user? Do you have the users are coming back? What's your weekly, daily active users? You know, these are the strong indicators. And what is your churn rate? If the churn rate is low, that is a strong indicator that, yes, there is a demand of your product in the market, and that should be tracked pretty much throughout.
I usually use a very simple principle when I'm trying to understand is this project has potential or it's like just a zombie. I just look on shape of curve of retention. And for me, it's not significant the size of retention. For me, it's significant shape of curve. If I see shape of curve like that, it means that it's dead. If I see that it's flattering and there is plateau, it may be small plateau. It's not significant. Then you may improve your product and raise this plateau. But plateau should exist. Then there is like a signal of product market fit. And usually, if there is no, like at least small plateau, then usually it's a signal that there is no even a kind of promise of product market fit, because there is no even a small cohort of users who is really interested in that. But when it's flattering, then you have it's a promise, and then you may gradually improve your product and make this plateau higher and higher.
Very interesting. Thank you. Maybe now let's return to the topic of AI, right? And I think this is prevalent. I think I'd like to hear diverse opinions on this one. They're talking about, we hear all the time, the ethics around and the ethical challenges and considerations around AI. I'd love to hear your experience around, in your particular fields, right? What are the most challenging considerations around whether you move ahead implementing AI into your processes and the ethical considerations? Ethics might not be so relevant in your case, but maybe let's replace it for challenges. And if ethics is a thing for your vertical, particularly, let's talk about it.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. So again, Tourism Ireland, in terms of our responsibility, we're working with two governments, the government in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. And so ethics are incredibly important. It's taxpayers' money. Integrity is incredibly important. And AI, I think, as with any technology, there's incredible opportunities. But then there is also the flip side around risks or ethics. And so just to take you into the tourism or travel vertical for a minute, we hear that up to 75% of people gain inspiration for their holidays from images and videos that they see on social media. And already you can start to see really big social media accounts popping up where the images are completely AI generated, and at the moment you can kind of tell. So let's say you've got an AI generated image of a rainy European street, but the rain is also on the table inside the cafe. So there's little glitches that you can see, okay, that's actually AI generated. But the uptake is huge because the image has been generated to gain a response. So that starts to raise ethical question marks, because it's going to be possible to come up with incredible images and videos that are really tantalizing for users, but they may not be authentic or true. And so again, as a sort of state tourist agency, it's going to be really important for us to make sure that authenticity, this experience, this place that you've just seen really exists. And if you spend money to come and visit us, you can see that place. That's going to be important. I think I'll flag up one other one, which is we've gone in tourism from years ago. I think you're probably all too young to remember this, but years ago when people booked their holidays by getting a physical brochure and you'd leaf through it and you'd circle with biro where you wanted to go, and then you'd go to your travel agent and you'd book it in person. Then maybe nearly 30 years ago, you had Booking.com entering the scene, or nearly 20 years ago, Airbnb entering the scene, and they tapped into people wanting to be able to browse and choose their own holidays. But now, probably all of us have had that experience where you think you're going to have a delightful afternoon choosing a holiday, and 4 hours later, you're nearly screaming at your phone because you're paralyzed with anxiety about making the right choice of hotel or location or whatever. So there's a world where AI will play a role there, and consumers might say, go to generative AI chatbot as an assistant and say, okay, based on my preferences, my family size, my days that I'm going to have off work, my budget and interests, build me an itinerary, where am I going on holidays, and let's book it. And that's great from a consumer point of view, and it could be really exciting. But given that AI will basically be taking from what's most mentioned on the internet, there's also a risk that that kind of behavior could feed into just the same places being surfaced all the time and say over-tourism concerns. So again, I think it's just all about how do we harness this brilliant new technology and use it for good and be aware of the risks and focus on things like authenticity, or focus on things like making sure all of the hidden gem destinations are covered in our online resources, so that when AI is giving a generative answer, it's pulling from all the options, not just the most popular ones. So that's a couple of sort of deep dive ones that are on my mind in tourism.
Yeah, if I jump in as well, unfortunately I'm old enough to remember the brochure, right? But obviously payments is, we have a software business, but we also operate in the payment space, which is heavily regulated. So particularly in Europe, you've got, EU AI Act coming down the tracks, you've got, multiple other pieces of legislation and regulation. And ultimately it comes down to, from an ethical perspective, have you set out a policy for how you're going to deal with it? Have you thought about it? I think what you're really trying to deal with underneath the surface is, in terms of what you're using, can you defend the outcomes or understand the outcomes that you get? And a lot of that comes down to, are there biases that are implicit within it? Like we see some of the headline stories, of things being generated where you go, okay, we know that's not a fit, but then how are you able to stand over the models that you're using? And obviously it depends on the different industry you're in, sector you're in, size, scale of the business, but certainly from a payments perspective or anything that falls into the regulated space, you've got to be able to have a set of processes in place that you can stand over. So like Square, given its technology background, is a huge advocate. It's one of our 4 core strategic pillars in terms of leveraging generative AI. But to make sure we do that, we've got a very clear set of policies in terms of how we use it, where we apply it, but also how we check on what the outcomes are, because that's the thing that we're going to get followed up on.
Let me interrupt you there, 'cause I think you raised a very interesting point, right? I think the panel earlier did mention this. We are in a realm where there are billions of unknowns, and what do you do? And all of you are in decision-making seats, right? And what I'd like to maybe prompt you on is, when you are facing unknown, and could be in the tourism industry, could be in the finance industry, how do you take decisions when you have to implement Gen AI because it's part of a trend? We need to think about it. This is what the board is saying. And we don't know what the potential outcome could be. And maybe if you can illustrate with an example where you are sitting today at a decision-making point and you don't know the response, and how do you assess the risk of this? When you potentially don't even know the outcomes. I don't know.
I can answer that, right? So based on my own experience, thankfully we are not in a very regulated space, first of all. And you can see that on my pick. It's not completely AI generated, but polished by AI. So just on Alice's point there on the ethic and the images you see. But sometimes it's good, to get that little bit of assistance from the AI wherever you can, right? To make things look good. So having said that, with my own experience and to your question, William, I think there's tremendous pressure on every founder, every startup, right, to bring the Gen AI into the mix in some capacity or the other. The question is, how do you actually go about it? Whether you want to implement something that you're going to give it to your end users, or you take a different track and do something that gives you, that kind of flexibility internally first, like drinking your own champagne. Right? So you do something and start with in-house. So that's what we did at Wayleadr. When the Gen AI came pretty much, and basically AI got commoditized pretty much early last year. We decided, okay, we have to do something about it. And the reason we want to do it is, most of the startups will have to do a lot more with very less. So where we can save time and money, what are the areas where we can bring generative AI and take help of it so that we don't have to spend, countless hours in doing that, or, it could be on the marketing front, for example, right? We don't need to have the creative writers. We don't have to, have a person responsible for creating, very enticing ads, how you're going to attract the customers. That can be offloaded to Gen AI. That's one thing. End users are the recipient of that, but not directly as part of your product, right? So that's one thing. The second is, many companies are trying to leverage generative AI, especially with the ChatGPT and Google Gemini and all that, right? So trying to bring that into their own internal customer support, right? You have marketing department, you have sales department. Normally in a startup world, sales guy won't have a lot of technical details of the product. Their objective is to go and sell the product, right? So they just know the surface of the product, what it does and what it does good for the end user. But when it comes to, they are the person who are the first point of contact when it comes to answering the RFPs or, doing the, filling out the questionnaires, especially if you're in a B2B space. Clients would ask, okay, what's your security posture looks like? How do you do this? What are the capabilities? So what we did, based on my experience, and I created that myself when initially, the Gen AI came out, the first thing I did was create the internal portal for the internal employees, where the customer support, the sales team could actually go and ask questions and get the up-to-date information based on the initial, RAG approach, so that the data is augmented through, and given the context to our own data that we have accumulated in our knowledge bases over the, years we have been in the industry. That actually frees up a lot of not only my time, my engineering team's time, but also give them the consistent responses, based on the question being asked. So I think that's one of the things where any company, no matter how small or big they are, and I think it's applicable to the enterprises as well, to start in-house, and see how it goes. Because when you're trying to put something out there in the market, then the question of, having addressing the bias, the fairness, the risk assessment, the regulatory compliance comes into picture. And those are bigger topics, right? And you have to be really careful how you want to address those and how you want to answer those. So.
Yeah, maybe I would want to say several words about my field, health field, and the implementation of generative AI in this field. I mentioned that we had a very intense experience before with machine learning in other fields, like with images, for example, and it was much easier because of two factors. And two factors makes implementation of AI and generative AI particularly difficult in health. First one is the problem of black box. You need to show to regulators how exactly you are providing this advice, what's the logic behind. And regulators, they don't believe to black boxes. And it was the reason why we implemented our medical chatbots using like very simple logic of tree rather than machine learning. We created two versions, but then we decided to use very simple version without machine learning because of regulatory difficulties. And second question, and it's much less evident for outsiders, is that society is not ready to accept any level of mistakes from such systems. It means that there are systems like MedPalm, for example, in Google, which may have a better quality of advice than most of doctors, and it's already proven, most of doctors. But people, they have tolerance for doctors' mistakes historically, but people have zero tolerance to any mistakes from such systems, the same as people have zero tolerance to traffic accidents from self-driving cars. And it means the moment when you put your system to real market, to real patients, and when you get the first crisis because of hallucinations from mistakes, like you are killed. It means that, and it will take many years, maybe a generation, before people will get this tolerance that the systems may have like some level of mistakes, because currently this tolerance is close to zero, what probably limits real implementation of such systems. Usually they work as a kind of copilots for doctors, because doctor helps you, doctor has a right to make mistakes, like AI system doesn't have a right to make mistake, any level of mistake.
I think going back to your question on where do you start, or how can you put together your sort of work list of what you're going to do, I just think AI is such a broad term. It's almost like saying electricity or mobile, or do you remember when big data was the thing that everybody was talking about? These are just such broad terms. And so I think that the best thing to do is to start thinking through what's a practical way that this could help me, that I am comfortable with, that I'll put into the plan, and what are some practical ways that this could detract or could be a risk that I'm not going to put into the plan. So to give a tangible example, we're using AI, and I think it's become an industry standard in marketing. We're using AI for media placements because I'm really comfortable with the idea that AI would look at millions of signals in a millisecond and decide, is it worth showing an ad to this person based on their behavior? Are they likely to be interested in visiting Ireland? Great, let's do that. What I'm not comfortable is the idea that the ad itself would be completely auto-generated because, again, as we said, ethics and authenticity are really important. So in that way, just for your own use case in your own company, starting to work through AI is such a broad term, but what are some tools or practical applications that would help me that I'm going to do, and what are some of the ones that I'm not ready for yet because there's a bit of figuring out still to do. And I think that's the most practical way to think about it.
No, definitely. Some amazing nuggets here. I need to summarize it in my head, but like one more.
Just maybe to come in on it as well. So like that, we would have started internally. Okay, how can we find those use cases so you can test it in that environment? I think going back to your original question, the decision making.
Yes.
It's what are you using it for, right? If you if you bet your whole future on it, right, that's a bad decision. Okay, if you're using it to really zone in on those things that you can't do or this can help you do faster. And we take that and sort of bring that out to our customer base. So again, that kind of mantra in Square of economic empowerment, how can we democratize AI for small businesses? So they're on a platform, they trust our platform. So how can we start to bring this into use cases that actually give them time back and let them start to leverage it? So if I take something like our customers in the restaurant sector, we can use the tool within our system. It can generate the menu description for them. Okay, it can generate different images in retail of the product, so you can have it in different categories. We're not doing this outside of the States, but in the US, within our messaging system, the Gen AI piece will scan the customer correspondence and effectively prompt the next best action. And because it's linked within that core platform, whether that goes into the marketing aspect or coupon or whatever else, and it drives that next prompt. And we've actually seen out of that, I think we've done just under 1 million of those prompts in terms of testing it, and I think 450,000 taken up, no editing, no change, absolutely run through. So we're starting to see customers get those wins and benefits, but of the use cases themselves, none on their own are so material that they're going to cause us a significant issue, but that constant focusing of them on it's actually solving pain points for customers. Can I do it faster? Can I do it cheaper? Can you take burden off me so I can give my time to doing something else to work the business?
Yeah. I mean, to summarize, I just want to sort of just pause. So I'm processing everything you said, which is incredible. I think learning one is try it in your own kitchen before you serve in the restaurant. So I really like that one. Then the second front that you talk about is this continuum of tolerance that is evolving, right? And there are certain tasks where if the outcome is so catastrophic that you're not even willing to risk. And we still believe in humans, and our tolerance is still more towards humans than towards machines. And we're going to see if that evolves, we'll see. Then the concept of practical, and again, I think it relates very closely to what Dmitry said, but the practical application is, as a decision maker, you're thinking about tasks that I'm willing to maybe put some risk simply because, for example, marketing, but I'm not willing because of the images, right? So I think some incredible pieces of knowledge here. I could ask a million more questions, but I'm just going to be quite nice. And where is this little square? Yeah. If anyone wants to ask a question to this amazing panel, feel free. No question.
I may propose one idea to think about. Generative AI was started became massive when ChatGPT was launched quite a long time ago already. And what I'm shocked how small is a real change in case of real applications in this time, because we're talking AI is huge, but if you really think what really changed, I may find just maybe one case is copilots for coding. I even can't find any other place where it's changed something. At least I don't know, and I think I know enough. It means that it's I believe that it's a big promise, but at this stage, honestly, we can't say that it's changed a lot. It's it doesn't change a lot, but maybe it's a big promise, but we will see. But I would say that it was highly exaggerated that the change will be fast and drastic and the world will be changed. No. Beyond maybe copilots and maybe some tasks in support, nothing was changed too much, honestly.
We have a question from you. So most of the innovations that have come out so far has been out of the US, and that's been amazing, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google. Here we are in Ireland now, or in Europe, and for us, biggest problem is like finding the right resources to ramp up. Even if you have an idea, we are not in the innovation space as much. So, what would be the advice for a company that like wants to innovate without being being any bit worried about like, okay, we can scale, we can create a machine learning team, we can create an AI ourselves. It's not one against the other. We are not like building on. We are building on the top of something. But to me, I don't see any AI new innovations out of Europe. So what do we do for that?
Great question.
Honestly, there are no innovations in Europe. Honestly, I may recall just maybe Mistral as the single significant AI innovation in Europe and nothing else. And it's quite a problem that Europe doesn't produce any innovation and everything significant happens in the United States and maybe for some extent in China, and Europe is declining. I don't know what to do with that. It's just the fact that nothing happens here.
I think one point from the question, if I gather, is like, could any of you comment that around environment? And it seems to be that the US is a more propitious environment to like create innovation. I mean, I'm bullish on Europe on many things. Maybe anyone can comment on if you are trying to innovate and create AI applications in Europe. I mean, do you think we're at a massive disadvantage in terms of like talent, everything?
I think it's mindset mostly. Lack of ambition, lack of greed. It's not about resources, it's about mindset, European mindset. People are not eager to be successful here. It's the main reason. It's like resources are here, like technologies are here. Like it's not about that.
For me, I think it depends like on the context you're trying to do it in, right? So the US is it's a bigger market, it's more liquid, particularly in stuff like the AI space. And we commented on it already. You need a good starting base to make really big ground quickly as it continues to evolve. Do I think the innovation environment, fintech environment, etc., here, London, across Europe, I think it's come along in huge waves. And we will see companies like, all sectors, growing quite quickly. And that's, I think there's much more support, there's much more understanding. I think we definitely get in our own way sometimes, mainly because you've got, totally different cultures, different standards, different environments, but you've got big pots, whether it's Berlin, London, emerging here of people now starting to come together. But whether they'll be able to kickstart something in AI, I don't know, because of the sheer depth to be really, really innovative and original up front. You need some capital. But I think somebody put it well on the panel beforehand. We actually don't know how it's going to roll out. And as people really start to leverage that, you could see, amazing things move quite quickly.
Well, looking at the history of AI, and we're sitting here in Google in the Foundry space, and actually the hub for Google in AI was a company called DeepMind, which was actually based in, I think, Oxford originally and London, and was bought by Google. So, funnily enough, a lot of Google's AI innovation actually did start in the UK and in Europe. So I'm going to back this amazing room of startups, and I don't know, maybe it's worth thinking about, like you raised some great topics on grit and ambition, but also maybe communities of influence that maybe if you're in Silicon Valley, you're in a hub, you're surrounded by people thinking about the same topics. How do you somehow create that sense of hub also, whether through events like this or, through getting communities together? So I think lots of opportunity, and I'm going to be deliberately hopeful and optimistic for this crew in here and for Europe.
I think, yeah, and one of the evident thing here, like if you're seeing so many people sitting in this room, if that's not an example of how many, AI companies are popping up in Europe, then what it is, right? So we have a clear evidence here in this room.
Half already left.
Yeah, look, and I think I agree with John's point a little bit. It also depends, when you start. One of the enticing geographies to start with have been always US, right? and normally companies start from there. But the things that we can do in EU, and especially in Ireland, I don't think Dublin is any less than Silicon Valley at this stage, right? We have so many startups coming up from Dublin alone, which is very like exciting to see. But I think we don't have the same kind of network of the investors here in Dublin and in Europe. And when you're dealing with investors and in Europe especially, what we have seen in the past is, based on my own experience, like their due diligence process takes longer. US-based investors are much quicker. And if you are a startup, and I think Amy or Lorna in the previous panel raised these points, like when you are a company that is just trying to get off in the market, you always have a burn that you are bringing with you, and you always have to keep one eye out on the runway that you have, and that's diminishing as you move forward, right? So if you enter in a conversation with a VC in Europe to raise capital, and that takes a long time, that's going to make your runway shorter and shorter. And that's why what we have seen, based on my own experience, people try to go to US to get the funding more quicker and easier to maintain that runway. But I think that's one of the point, like Enterprise Ireland is a great enabler. They help a lot. They helped us as well when we were starting off. And, you do have these communities which can help you get off the ground if you are looking to that pre-seed or seed funding.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and experience with myself, this audience. I am very, very grateful, and just want to make a special mention again to Tom, Laura, and Adam for organizing all this and making this day possible. Thank you so much, and yeah.
Maybe just like one word from me, like, don't make conclusions that I'm saying that it's impossible to be successful in Europe. We created all our companies in Europe. We exited 6 times, and we sold companies to Facebook. We sold companies to Google. Everything was created in Europe, like based on European talent, using European money. It's possible, but it's you should have such ambition. Europe has everything, but you should have ambition. What Europe lacks is ambition. Not everything else is here.
Thank you very much. I'll pass it back on to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You good?
Well, everybody, we're right at the end of the sessions today. Hopefully everybody enjoyed themselves. This next session isn't going to be too long, and I was outside a couple of minutes ago, and yes, the drinks are getting poured out there. They're not out there yet, so there's no point in leaving early. You're not going to get more if you leave a little bit early. But we have Eric. He's going to come along now. Eric is a founder himself. He had a very successful exit a few years back, and he's going to talk to us about the history of AI and how that is going to affect us in the future, especially in the world of startups. I've looked through his slides. We're in for a wild ride, everybody. Yeah, there's a lot. Without context, them slides look weird, but I'm sure Eric's here to give the context to them. Eric?
Is this working? I just want to open up by saying thank you for the introduction, and with context, the slides are super weird still, so let's get started. All right, so I know what you're all thinking right now. Thank God, finally a talk on AI. And sarcasm aside, why does the world actually need another talk on AI? And the reality is, well, it might not, but I'm here now, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. And this talk will be a little different than the ones you're used to, and I think there's some value that you might get out of it. So I'm not here to tell you about all the wonderful things you can build with AI. I'm actually here to tell you about the first principles of AI. And what I mean by first principles is the fundamental concepts which all of AI are built on. So first principle thinking involves breaking complex problems down into their most basic elements and then reassembling them from the ground up. And you're probably thinking, why does this matter to me? Well, if you're a startup who wants to build a new product based around artificial intelligence, or an investor who needs to know where to put your money onto effective things, then your business will live and die on your ability to basically tell the difference between AI breakthroughs and AI bullshit. And frankly, there's a lot of bullshit being talked about right now in AI. Anyway, in this talk, I'm going to specifically focus on two elements of artificial intelligence. That would be machine learning and generative AI. After this talk, you'll walk away knowing what learning and creativity are, how they work, and that they're actually two sides of the same coin. So let's get started. As some of you may know, in 1950, Alan Turing would pose his famous Turing test for intelligent machines. And then 2 years later, Claude Shannon would build Theseus, the first machine actually capable of learning. But long before that, there was a far stranger and invention that, while not technically machine learning, could be considered the spiritual predecessor to the discipline. To give context, the year was 1943. The leading opinion among the Allied forces was that the world had far too many Nazis in it and not enough ways to blow them up. Enter Project Pigeon. The US Navy was looking for an answer to the formidable German Bismarck battleship. While rudimentary missile technology did exist at the time, the vacuum tube-based electronics were too large and fragile to be used as a guidance system. So to get around this, psychologist, inventor, Harvard professor, and whatever you call the opposite of an animal rights activist, Frederick Skinner had a simple idea. Let's train pigeons to guide the missiles. As seen in the image above, yeah, this was real. This is how the US blew up German battleships. The nose cone had 3 circular screens, and each screen mounted on pivots fitted with sensors that would measure any angular movement. Behind each screen was a little pigeon-sized cockpit, and using these optical lenses, they could actually project whatever was in front of the missile. So the three pigeon co-pilots would have previously gone through a basic training where they'd be shown pictures of German battleships and everything but pictures of German battleships. And if they picked on the battleship and only the battleship, they would be given birdseed. So effectively, like, once this was deployed and locked on target, if the battleship, like if the missile steered off course, the birds would start pecking on the screen and actually steer the missile back towards the ship. So yeah, our missiles, or the US's missiles in World War II were actually being piloted by 3 hungry and deeply misled pigeons. And our little bird is actually doing something fundamentally identical to modern machine learning. See, people say that pictures are worth 1,000 words, but this is rarely true. Usually they're worth 1 word. Warships come in all shapes and sizes, you know, big, small, fast, slow. Some have these dramatic guns sticking out of their bows, while others are more modest but deadly, you know, missile silos. Some are floating airfields sending death from above, others send death from below. But, you know, regardless of their category and all else, warships are typically represented by a symbol. And that symbol is warship, regardless of whether it's written in English, Spanish, Chinese, whatever. What's interesting is that the symbol warship has different subjective meaning depending on who or what you are. So if you're a sailor, the meaning is enemy. If you're a civilian, it's danger. If you're a bird, a pigeon, the meaning is food. Warship or not a warship? It's a simple enough thing to recognize, and most people can do it without any special training. You know, between history books and museums and whatever, movies, you know, we have enough context and common knowledge to classify this pretty easily, and even a pigeon can do it with very little training. So how do we do it, though? The answer is that we recognize common features that exist across all military boats. We basically learn how to boil down all the warships we've seen over our entire lives into just a few distinct characteristics. Characteristics which set them apart from regular boats. This is learning through compression, taking in a large body of meaningless information and then noticing that there are these characteristics that begin to repeat amongst the individual things. This is what makes different things, in fact, different, whether or not they do or don't have one of these repeating characteristics. And in noticing these characteristics, they become more important than the original thing itself. That is actually how we are able to assign meaning and learn, you know, regardless whether it happens in a machine or otherwise. So to summarize, we can now define all of machine learning pretty succinctly. It is all basically just fancy data compression. And I mean, actually, that's a little reductive. To be more precise, it's very fancy data compression. So JPEG, zip, PNG, I'm sure you've come across all these file extensions before. They tell your computer two things. One, this file has been compressed, and two, this is the algorithm to do it. Now, this is not machine learning, but like Project Pigeon, it's close enough that it can help guide our understanding. There's only one big difference between general compression and learning, and it's not whether it happens in a brain or a computer. General purpose compression is data agnostic, whereas learning isn't. Ultimately, data is always just ones or zeros, with or without any meaning behind them. In general compression, the data is basically treated the same way no matter what it is, what its meaning is. So let's look at JPEG compression as an example. So keep in mind, computers don't see images like we do, they see arrays of numbers. So in raw form, this picture is pretty detailed. Every pixel gets its own numbers, and the file size is huge. Run it through JPEG compression, though, and now it's really small. It's still a sequence of ones and zeros, but now we've thrown away a lot of the kind of unimportant, less important details. So now when we decompress it, we get our dog back, but all the details are gone. When choosing where to cut the fat, JPEG favors the overall content of the image while sacrificing its finer details, and that's where we get the iconic, blocky JPEG artifacts. And they're the same artifacts no matter what you compress, because whatever data goes in, it's always compressed in exactly the same way. That's what I mean by data agnostic. Learning is different, though. When you learn something, there's no clear distinction between the data being compressed and the algorithm doing the compressing. They're all kind of just one thing at that point. So the data is used to best learn how to compress the data. And practically speaking, your machine learning algorithm will look at a big pile of data and then try and find those common patterns. So like the patterns that we would find in military ships. And once it finds those patterns, they're then baked directly into the ML model itself. This is what makes a custom compression algorithm custom. For each piece of individual data being compressed, it only needs to remember which specific collection of learned patterns do or don't exist in that individual item of data. So let's revisit our dog. But now we'll compress it using machine learning instead of a general compression. In this case, our ML model was first trained on a lot of pictures of dogs, and therefore it learned to recognize dog-like features, so things like fur. So now when we compress the model, we aren't just storing what colors and general image gradients exist in different locations. Now we're storing whether things like fur exists at this image location and what the general orientation of that fur would be. Now, when we decompress this image, we can recover a whole lot more information starting from a much smaller file size. And this is because the image features of the fur are no longer stored in the compressed file itself. They're actually stored in the learned ML model. There is, however, one potentially big issue with decompressing this way. While at first glance, the ML decompression looks a lot more like our original dog than the JPEG compression, when we zoom in, you'll notice that some pieces don't just reproduce the same fur from the original, but it actually imagines completely new fur, like in the area where the dog was out of focus and no fur existed in our original. Now, you would actually already be very familiar with this particular kind of artifact. In ChatGPT, you've been calling them hallucinations. That's right, what I just showed you was actually generative AI. So Albert Einstein once said that creativity is intelligence having fun. Steve Jobs would then go on to say that creativity is just connecting things. And both of these guys were wrong. And thanks to the first principles, you now know why they're wrong. Creativity is actually just fancy decompression. Now you might be thinking, wait, Eric, Gen AI is way more powerful than that. I've seen Gen AI create entirely new dogs from just a prompt, not just change its hair a little bit. And you'd be right. Gen AI can be taken way further than just the basic image compression I showed you. But no matter how far you take it, it's still doing the exact same thing. Remember, we can compress an entire image into just a single word that describes its essence. So again, back to our dog. If you compress the image down to a single tag, golden retriever, you can then decompress that tag into an entirely new golden retriever. This is why I referred to learning and creativity as two sides of the same coin. They are, in fact, inverses of each other. So to summarize, learning and creativity both exploit the fact that real-world data tends to have a lot of redundancy in it. All boats tend to have boat-like features. All dogs tend to have dog-like features. Once the ML model is trained, you can give it some new piece of data that it's never seen before. And as long as that particular piece of data belongs to a category with the same features as the things it's been trained on, it'll be able to recognize it because of those compressed patterns. And this is fundamentally how all of learning works, machine or otherwise. Now, if you take that same process and do it in reverse, from just a concept, you can lean on all those learned features to build an entirely new make-believe instance of that concept. And now you just, and now you don't just know the first principles of Gen AI, but you also know basically how your own imagination is actually working under the hood. And finally, if you only take one thing away from this first part of this talk, I just want you to remember, if you ever need to blow up Nazis, please remember that pigeons actually make a surprisingly good option. And with that, we close part 1 of this talk, and we move on to part 2, latent space. So now that you guys know basically the first principles between machine learning and generative AI, we can go one step further and talking about the truly magic first principle that binds those two halves of the coin together, and that is latent space. But first, we need another quick history lesson. So amongst computer vision researchers, if there was only one data set you could choose to use for the rest of your life, it would absolutely be ImageNet. This thing has like 14 million images, and 1 million of those have been pre-tagged into 20,000 different categories. So things like dogs, boats, windows, houses, cars, whatever. This training set was so successful that it actually kicked off an annual competition to see who could train the best computer vision system. So just like our little kamikaze pigeon learned how to recognize warships, this was a competition to see if computers could recognize all 20,000 of those categories. Now, this contest would go down in AI history, not because of the contest itself, but because 2 years after the inaugural event, Alex Krzyzewski would submit AlexNet, an unorthodox solution that would change the field of computer vision and artificial intelligence forever. Alex's submission, AlexNet would follow a trail of breadcrumbs peppered across the history of computer science and even before. So we've known for about 100 years now that the brain is an electrical network of neurons that fire in all or nothing pulses. So at the same time Skinner was training his pigeons in 1943, Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts were proposing the artificial neuron, which is a fancy way of talking about something that's really not that fancy. It's just a linear threshold, Kate. Basically, you sum up a bunch of numbers. If they're above a threshold, you set the output to 1. If they're below, you set it to 0. That's it. But while this is basic, it's the model of artificial neuron we still use today. Now, a single neuron really can't do a whole lot on its own, but the nice thing about neurons is that they synergize extremely well with themselves. Oh, my text is changing. Okay, so Donald Hebb popularized the concept in, oh, sorry, missed a bit there. Sorry, the font's changing. Yeah. So this is where the field of neural networks come in. So Donald Hebb actually popularized the field in 1949 with his fun catchphrase, cells that fire together, wire together. Then a lot of the techniques were explored in the 1950s, but it would be Frank Rosenblatt's 58 paper on the perceptron that would really become the grandfather or even the great-grandfather of today's modern neural networks. In fact, the multi-layer perceptron is probably the oldest architecture still used today. But I'd say the true rise of deep learning would need to be credited to Yann LeCun, who in 1989 came up with a really innovative new way to wire neurons to make them really good at computer vision. And his approach would come to be known as the convolutional neural network, or CNN for short. And in fact, AlexNet was basically just LeCun's '89 network jacked up on 2 decades of Moore's law and the ImageNet dataset. So it didn't really actually change any of the algorithms or really much of anything. It was really just all that extra data and processing, and it took neural networks from the worst possible machine learning model you could go with to the best pretty much overnight, kicking off the current era of deep learning. So, okay, but the history lesson so far just tells us how deep learning came to dominate the AI world, but it doesn't really tell us why it's dominating it. In fact, a lot of people don't actually know why neural networks are able to do these seemingly magic things as portrayed in this webcomic. To understand what makes neural networks so powerful, first we need to talk about latent space. So latent is Latin for hidden. So latent space is kind of like this hidden world, the world where latent variables live. So what's a latent variable? Well, let's go through a solid example. Here's some information on what my brain was doing last night. You've got my various brain waves up there, what times they happened, what stage of sleep I was in, whatever I was dreaming or not, all that good stuff. And all this information actually came from a little ring on my finger that could only measure 3 things: temperature, heart rate, and hand movement. A ring on your finger has no idea what's actually going on in your brain, but it doesn't need to, because there's a latent relationship between these measurable biometrics and your various stages of sleep. So the English language has a word for everything we've just covered. It's called insights. Latent space is incredibly powerful because it's a space where insights live. So before I mentioned, machine learning is basically fancy pattern recognition. Well, this is kind of the recognition of hidden patterns, ones that aren't obvious. That's what makes machine learning so powerful. So almost all the recent success of deep learning can be credited to its strength at finding these kinds of latent relationships within data sets. So up until about a decade ago, turning raw data into these insights was something humans could do naturally and computers were absolutely terrible at. But thanks to deep learning, this isn't the case anymore. So this is why deep learning works so well. So now that we know what latent space is, let's step through a typical CNN to see how we get there. It's basically a sequence of stacked layers. Each layer is distilling the feature from the layer before it. So finding patterns, then finding patterns of those patterns, then patterns of the patterns of the patterns of the patterns, yada yada, so forth, all the way down until you map from data space into some hidden latent space. And that's where you can start to categorize things like cows or dogs or warships or whatever. The more layers you have, the more complicated the features it can learn. And this is what's meant by deep learning. The depth refers to the number of layers or the complexity of the problem. So the way it works is that shallow layers just look at the small patches of pixels and then turn them into basic geometric features. So lines, circles, gradients, that kind of thing. Then the middle layers turn those basic features into more complex things, so like eyes, tires, whatever, handlebars on a bicycle. And then the very deep layers start to, put all those pieces of the Mr. Potato Head together and create things like, people, dogs, cars, flamingos, all that kind of stuff. So when you or I recognize something as a dog, it's not because we've memorized how every breed of dog looks from every color and every single orientation it could be sitting. It's because we keep this internal representation of the general appearance of dogs, so the various dog-like patterns which make up the animal that we've learned and observed throughout our entire lifespans. So we instinctively know what a dog looks like, and this extends even to dog-like things, so artistic interpretations of dogs or other dog-like animals. Even cats have some dog-like patterns to them, and we can put a number on this. So on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is cat and 10 is dog, we can quantify how dog-like certain breeds of cats are. And this is what we mean by space when we talk about latent space. It's a continuous thing. Here we see all the cats clustered together in latent space, and then dogs all cluster in another area. But there's a very distinct axis between the two clusters. This is the dog-cat dimension. Effectively, this is what AlexNet was actually doing to the 20,000 different ImageNet categories. It was creating a high-dimensional continuous latent space to organize them. And the beautiful thing about latent space, because it's continuous, it means you can take samples from anywhere, not just where you gave it training data. You could choose some new made-up animal right in the middle between cats and dogs, or like between dogs and Andy Warhol paintings. Creativity is just the process of decompressing these insights, these points in latent space. A great first practical example of this is the autoencoder. Autoencoders are a natural extension of the AlexNet concept and one of the simplest generative models. You can think of an autoencoder like a copy of AlexNet bolted onto essentially an inverse of itself. So the AlexNet part is called the encoder, and it compresses data into a latent space. The inverted AlexNet is then the decoder, the generative AI part, and it decompresses a point from latent space back into data. The way you train an autoencoder is by passing your training data all the way through and trying to reproduce the input and the output and seeing the difference, trying to make a perfect copy. By learning both compression and decompression as one global process, you actually learn an encoder and a latent space that makes it really easy to decompress later. To give a practical example, imagine you take on the role of an encoder yourself and you ask a friend to behave as the decoder. This is called the box game, and please don't try it at home. It's very boring and that will annoy your friends. The rules are simple. You've been given a collection of boxes of different shapes and sizes, and your job is to describe to your friend this box to a point where they can actually make a perfect copy of that box. And you can choose to describe the box in any way. You could say it's vertices and edges in a graph. You could chop up all of 3D space into a giant grid and tell them which positions do or don't have a unit of box inside. But after playing the box game a few times, you probably won't do any of those things. You'll probably realize that you can summarize any box with 3 numbers: the width, height, and length. And after a few rounds of the game, you actually learn that those are the only 3 numbers you need. Then you don't actually need to make real copies of boxes anymore. You can start telling your friend any 3 random numbers or points in 3-dimensional box space, and they'll be able to make new boxes that didn't exist anymore. So with this one straightforward concept of autoencoding, you can make a lot of different applications. One of my personal favorites, and one thing we did quite a lot at Artomatics, was texture synthesis. Once the network's trained, just feed in a small image to find its point in latent space, and then the autoencoder can spit out as much as you want. Or, one of our other favorites at Artomatics, style transfer. So again, these are literally just decompressing points from latent space. That's literally all this is doing. And these things are fun, but as I mentioned, latent space is continuous, and therefore the real power of latent space is that continuous nature of it. So here's an autoencoder, one of the first ones actually, trained on handwritten digits from 0 to 9. What happened is you compressed these digits down to a 2-dimensional latent space, then sampled a regular grid from that space and decompressed it, and you'll see that actually all 10 digits then create this smooth interpolation of features. And we can do the same thing on human faces. Note that when we do this on faces, we can see that now the head orientation and the facial expressions have been disentangled from each other. So one axis is the smile axis, and another one is the orientation axis. So if I have a picture of any one of you guys, I can pass that into an encoder, find its point in latent space, move that point along the smile axis, and then invert it through the decoder. Welcome to the world of deepfakes. So these latent space manipulation techniques have come a long way from those blurry faces back in 2014, and now they look pretty realistic. But moreover, we can do all sorts of complex manipulations, as the ones shown above. Moreover, you can now navigate through your latent space using only words. To understand how this works, we need to look at the new kid on the block, the transformer. You've probably heard of ChatGPT and other large language models, and these things are basically just big transformers, which was invented here at Google in a 2017 paper. Attention is all you need, so thank you, Google. So what's a transformer? Well, at a high level, it's still just an autoencoder. The big difference is that they're designed to work on sequence data like languages instead of image data like pictures. But because they're still basically autoencoders, that means we can mix and match them together with CNNs, and they can all share, a common latent space. And this is really important, the idea of a common latent space. So we could use a transformer to encode as the encoder part and then decode into an image. And that's how image creation works. Or you can go the other way. You can put in an image as your input, encode that into your point and latent space, compress the image, and then decode that using a large language model, and then get an image tag. The point is, latent space is actually this super general thing. A single latent space can be learned across multiple networks and even multiple different types of data. So it's incredibly powerful and flexible. So now, unfortunately, I'm hitting the 25-minute mark, and I do realize that I'm standing between you guys and drinks. So I am turning into a pumpkin here, and I'm going to need to wrap this up. I just want to leave you with some closing remarks about generative AI. And now that you have the first principles, I want to just maybe highlight some common misconceptions I feel are worth addressing. The first one is that hallucinations are a feature, not a bug. So if you find that hallucinations are a problem in whatever you're doing, or people or talk about, oh God, if only we could get these hallucinations sorted. So generative AI is just creativity. It's just imagination. Hallucinations are supposed to happen. That is fundamentally what it does. Now, the reality is a lot of people are actually more interested in machine learning-based search, not actually the generative part. They just happen to be using things like ChatGPT for search because the ML side is so much more powerful than like the classic non-ML based search. But ultimately, yeah, just really want to I really want to emphasize this because yeah, hallucinations are great. They're awesome. That's the magic, not a problem. And there's no fixing it. There's other applications you can build that are closer to what you actually want, but please stop complaining about hallucinations. And second, well, bigger networks and more training data are of course always a good thing, and we're always going to put more data and more training and bigger networks, yada yada. I don't think that's actually really where the meaningful progress in generative AI is really going to come from anymore. The big open problem right now is actually latent space navigation, and how do we train models that have a tamer, more human-friendly latent space, something that's more intuitive to us. So ChatGPT really didn't add a whole lot to the GPT that had already been there for years. What it added was a little bit of reinforcement learning at the end to make the navigation of the latent space that was already there in GPT more, I guess, intuitive for a human to just kind of navigate through natural language, through basically just conversations. But by solving that latent space navigation problem, by making it more intuitive for all of us to find the information we were looking for that was locked away in GPT, it became this huge viral, world-changing thing that it is today. And realistically, making better AI breakthroughs aren't just a money problem. They really are an innovation problem. So as you've seen, this is really just data compression and decompression. This isn't general intelligence. There's no such thing as like really true reasoning behind it. There's no consciousness. There's just a whole lot of aspects of human intelligence that just don't exist there. What it does have is all of the insight, all the information of the entire internet baked into this really nice space. And it's really on us to use our own logic and reasoning and consciousness to navigate that properly. And at the moment, the latent space navigation is not a solved problem. It's still, people still struggle a lot of the time, and that's why I constantly hear people talking about this new job, apparently, called the prompt engineer. So that's basically just saying it's still too hard to find the point in latent space we're looking for. So let's train humans to just basically ask a lot of questions and find where kind of the dodgy bits in latent space are and where the good bits are, and kind of navigate it themselves without a map. So that's misguided because ultimately, every time you retrain the model, it's going to be a completely different latent space. And realistically, this is a technology problem, not a human problem. So yeah, prompt engineering, very much not a thing. And finally, my third and final closing remark, because at this point I'm just waffling and stopped and went off piece from my notes. I just want to say, if you ever find yourself on a battleship, beware of pigeons. Thank you.
Great. Brilliant. What a background to end the conference with. Is Henry here? Henry is not here. Laura, Tom, if you want to come up. So Henry's not here at the moment. But I do want to say thank you very much to my colleague Henry. He did so much work for this conference. Laura and Tom as well, please, a round of applause. Thank you so much. And is that Henry up there? I think so. I can't see in the dark. No, I don't think it is. But Henry, thank you so much for your help. Thanks to everyone attending online. Thanks to everyone here in Dublin. And yeah, today was, I think, really successful. We'll get your feedback afterwards, of course. But we really tried this idea of not 10,000 people, only 300 people. A lot of them CTOs, a lot of them product people, a lot of them founders, investors. Yeah, really happy with it. So let's do more AI events across Europe and especially here in Dublin. Thank you so much, everyone.